Greetings, everybody. This is Christopher Messina coming at you from the Messy Times studios, broadcasting as ever from the beach and the Space Coast of the last free state in America, Florida. It is the 27th of July, 2023, and we are delighted and honored to have in the studios today Tom DeSchane, who is a retired Chief Master Sergeant with the 123rd Squadron Special Tactics Group of the Air National Guard. Did I get all that right?
Yeah, 123rd Special Tactics Squadron of the Kentucky Air National Guard.
The Kentucky Air National Guard. Fair enough. Okay,
Yep.
we left out a shout out to Kentucky, which I hear is coming back to being a free state after a little hiatus. So anyway, thanks for taking the time to come on. And we'll kick off right. Basically, we'd love to have on the show folks who got a particular expertise and experience that maybe most people don't, and they don't get real insights into, right? And so maybe tell us a bit about. Or a lot about, quite frankly, your time as a combat controller, what you saw, what you saw in your evolution there. I'll hand it over to you. If we have questions that I think will clarify for folks, I'll dive in.
Sure, absolutely. So just kind of give you a little bit of information about me. I started out my career into the Air Force back in 1987. So quite a ways back. But I joined the Air Force just basically to get the money for education, and then I was going to do 4 years and get out.
Right.
But 28 years later, I retired from the Air Force. But within that time, initially I went into the Air Force to be a what they call a security police. And when I was at basic training, they said, "Hey, if you want to come down and get this briefing about pararescue and combat control, you can get out of basic training for a little bit of time." And so I was like, yep, I'm in. I'm going to do that. So I went and sat down in the briefing, and I found out about combat control, and I fell in love with it. I was like, I joined the Air Force. I wanted to do something fun. So I went out and took the PASS test, which is the physical ability stamina test back then. Now they call it the initial fitness test. But I went out there and I took the test, and unbelievably, I passed it. Just barely, with no prep time or anything like that. I think I only had like about 3 seconds left on the run, but I still squeaked by.
The benefit of youth.
Right, exactly. And then high school, being 3-season athlete, I think that kind of helped.
That would probably contribute a lot more than the youth, but yes.
Yeah. So, and then I entered my pipeline, just like any other combat controller. The first school is the hardest, right? You have, when I went through, it was called the INDOC course, and it was just a butt kicker. They just beat us down, built us up as a team. It was just fitness all day and all night, just wearing us down. And from there, I ended up going to dive school, jump school, survival school, Army Airborne School to learn how to jump out of airplanes. Then the air traffic control school, because as a combat controller, we're air traffic controllers by trade. And then finally the combat control apprentice course, which was the culmination of all this training that we've done, which was probably about a year and a half of what we call a pipeline of schools. And then I finally put my beret on, and nice. I was like, awesome. So now I'm basically 2 years into my career already at this point. And I got assigned to McCord Air Force Base out in Washington State, which I believe is now Fort Lewis / McCord Joint Base. But anyways, I spent the rest of my 2 years there, but a lot of that time was deployed for Desert Shield and Desert Storm. I got to participate in that. I got the certificate saying I was there.
There you go.
Yeah, it was my first deployment, and I absolutely loved it. It was.
Let me jump back for a second for everyone who's listening. Yeah. So when you say, they brought you in and told you all about the various options, coming out of basic, not in basic training right now. Here are some of the options. What was it that clicked for you? What did they say to you about combat control specifically, where you're like, oh yeah, that's it, I'm doing that?
Well, I wanted to do something fun. And, going through high school, I was constantly looking for something fun, something challenging. And when they had the film, the old film projectors, reel to
Right.
reel, and they're showing that guys were jumping out of airplanes, guys were scuba diving, they were doing air traffic control on dirt airstrips, and they had motorcycles and ATVs, and I was like, well, that looks like a lot
I
of
can do
fun.
all that. That looks awesome. And that's the
Looks a
big
lot.
thing that most people don't get when they first hear about combat control. It really is the massive difference is air traffic control, which when people start to think about it, like in a war zone or outside of a major airport, that's very important, right? If you're going to guide planes and bombs and things within a very tight set of confines, like that is kind of one of the big differentiators about what you guys do versus a lot of other operators.
Yeah. And then as I started digging into it and finding out more about combat control, because at that point all I knew was what was up on that film and what the cadre member was telling us out in the audience. So as I dug into it and I started to find out a little bit about the history, I started kind of develop, hey, this might be something that I might want to stick with. I might not want to go back to North Dakota State University and be an architect.
Right.
I
As
might want to
compelling as
continue
that
moving,
sounds versus bombs and motorcycles.
right? Um, and but yeah, so that ultimately it was the challenge I think that was in front of me. I love having challenges, and that's where I actually seem to work the best. If I'm just sitting back on my laurels in my easy chair like this, things are kind of dull. I would so much rather be active and doing something more important.
Right. And a little more adrenaline, quite frankly.
Exactly. Yep. So
The re-up, so clearly your 4-year plan evaporated because you found something you love doing. You got deployed, and that was
yep.
successful. And then from there, I mean, after you came back from Desert Storm, what was the major kind of next step?
Yeah, so my next step, as I had gone through the pipeline, there was a class right behind me. And these guys were all from the Kentucky Air National Guard, and they were starting up the first combat control flight in the National Guard, Air National Guard. So I kind of got to know those guys, and I kept in contact with them when I got to McCord. And when I saw that I was going to get out, I saw an opportunity where I could still be a combat controller, but yet go to college and still try to achieve that goal that I had. And when I left active duty and went to the National Guard, I was really surprised. I was surprised at the level of professionalism that these guys had, the amount of work that they had offered to me so I could go out and do my job. So I ended up spending a few years as a traditional guardsman, went to school for just a very short time. And then I realized I want a full-time job here. So they have, most people assume Air National Guard is 1 weekend a month and 2 weeks out of the year. Well, for a full-time guy, which is what we call active guard and reserve position, it's just like being on active duty, except for you're managing the programs of the unit while everybody else, the traditional people, are doing their jobs. You're sitting there and you're working and you're trying to get training set up. You're fulfilling some exercises, deployments, and all that sort of stuff. So,
and that sort of process has evolved over time as it became clear there's kind of a middle ground between pure active duty and reservists, that we actually have to have something coordinating, because we can't all be here 2 weeks a year, right? There has to be
right.
structure, and some percentage of the team has to be full-time. Was that always true, or did that evolve over time as the
No, it's always been true. They've always had a full-time force there. Even if they're flying airplanes, there's full-time mechanics, to maintain the aircraft. There's full-time fuels peoples. Every aspect of the Air National Guard, there's always somebody there full-time running the programs.
Right.
Make sure that everything's going smoothly, meeting all the all the requirements that have to be accomplished. But
You certainly want mechanics full time who are dedicated to their task.
right? So as a traditional guardsman, though, I mean, I still got to do my 1 weekend a month, 2 weeks a year, but I was also still working day in and day out. So maybe 2 or 3 days out of the week. Maybe I would come in and I would do some jump training, jumping out of airplanes, maybe going down to the Ohio River and getting my dives in, my compass dives, or just basic land ground maneuvers and stuff like that.
I'm
Yeah.
always going to jump in when you raise something that people may not know about. What's a compass dive?
Compass dive. So it's basically when you're given a certain point on the beach that you got to hit. So when you go underwater with your in scuba, you have a compass board, and you basically hold the compass board in front of you, and you shoot for that target on the beach. So, and you got to be proficient at it.
Sure.
When you're in the oceans, you got to be cognizant of tides and the movement of the water and all that stuff, and how long it's going to take you to get there, how much air do I have in my tank, and all that sort of stuff. So there's a level of proficiency that you have to maintain to be able to be good at it. So, but yeah, so that was me as a traditional guardsman. When I got my full-time position, it just, life became awesome. So I spent my first 12 years as just an operator. And that was just, learning my craft, going through the pipeline, and then getting my team and getting rated on the team, get my 5 level. So when you put your beret on, you're a 3 level. And then when you get your team, then you're working to get your 5 level. So you can start operating. And then after that, you want to work to your 7 level where you can actually go out and work on your own, work in airfields, doing air traffic control, going out and being a JTAC, Joint Terminal Attack Controller, with another unit. So maybe a Special Forces unit or, Navy. Marines,
You point to one of the big differentiators as I've come to understand it, is unlike most branches of the services, combat controllers are constantly embedded with units of Army, Marines, Navy, right? So it's very much a one or maybe 2-man show attached to someone else and kind of stand alone. Is that do other branches do that, or really is because of that special air traffic control ability that you really are kind of uniquely situated to be embedded with other groups?
Yeah, SUNS Combat Controllers is pretty unique for the fact that we provide that ground forces to aircraft link. So we're providing the aircraft what's happening on the ground, and then we're also talking to our ground forces commander, telling them, hey, these are the aircraft that we have above us that we can use to either for fires or for what we call ISR, where you're just evaluating what's going on around you. But there's all sorts of, I don't know what's the word for it, different roles that combat controllers fulfill as that link between the ground and the Air Force, or not Air Force, but the aircraft above us.
Right. That's the major difference. Oh.
Yep. Yeah.
So after you got active, you moved all the way through that, and then was it just a lot of deployments, a lot of training? Do you cycle through both, or?
Yeah, a lot of training. So we grew from a combat control flight, which was about 25 people, to a special tactics squadron, and that grew us from that 25 people up to about 75. And it added on our pararescue folks and our special operations weather guys, who are now SR. That's their new name for them. And then all our brand new combat support folks. So it really grew our unit significantly. And while we're doing all that growth, there was probably about 2 years of growth, bringing in new people, trying to fill all the positions that we had. That's when all of a sudden 9/11 happened.
Mhm.
By chance, our unit was overseas. We were in Bulgaria doing a NATO exercise, and that's when 9/11 happened. We just happened to be in our rooms just before we started all our exercise missions, and we happened to watch, the towers come down, and we're like, oh. So we started packing up our gear, thinking we were going to come straight back so we can turn around and head back overseas. But they did continue on with the exercise, and then we shipped back. But luckily, in those 2 years of the unit growing and getting some experience behind it, when we did get back to the States, we got deployed right away, and we were overseas, I believe by 1 November 2001. No, it might have been middle of November. So, and then my first job, my first deployment, I ended up going to Bagram Tower, and I was with the team that opened up that airfield. So I was pretty excited about that. And it was day-night operations, working air traffic control, not just U.S. aircraft, but it was all the NATO aircraft, foreign aircraft. I mean, we had aircraft coming from all different nations. We're trying to work out through all the different accents as people were coming in and trying to provide air traffic control to them.
To my listeners as well, I gotta say, Tom used one of the most understated phrases just now when you say you opened up Bagram Air Force at the base, the air base. At the time, right, wasn't that the space where the Northern Alliance was dug in like trench warfare against the Taliban, and they'd been stuck in a stalemate for years until you guys basically unlocked it with air power from above?
Yep. Yeah, so they had the ODA came in and they seized the airfield, started pushing the Northern Alliance away, and then the combat control air traffic controllers, my team came in and we started immediately bringing in aircraft and start bringing in forces, bringing in equipment to that airfield. So yeah, it was kind of crazy at first, but we started to get a handle on it, making sure that everybody was safe. Aircraft were landing at night, blacked out. Aircraft were taxiing with no lights on, coming into the parking aprons with no lights on. With the marshalling guys out there trying to make sure the aircraft doesn't hit them, the aircraft doesn't, all that sort of stuff.
If another plane hit anything, trying to do that in the dark because lights would be very dangerous. And
lights would be very dangerous. Yep. And I was there at Bagram Tower until let's see, February. Yeah, no, towards the end of February. So until we finally handed it off to regular air traffic controllers.
That's a really intensive, contested 3-month period where it was near daily combat to keep them off the airfield.
Yep. We work constantly working CASEVACs where helicopters would bring in the wounded. And they would do the transloads onto the fixed wing aircraft and then fly them off to Germany, to help those guys out. So saw a lot of, I saw and worked a lot of those, which is always sad to see our operators have to go through that. But what it is. It is what it is at the beginning of any operation. So after that, I redeployed up to our forward operating base, and then I ended up flying on AC-130 gunships. So I finished the tower, and then it was like 2 days later, I started flying on these gunships during Operation Anaconda. Basically, again, I was the ground guy, but now I was sitting up in the aircraft behind the weapons officer. And so we had a ground guy attached to the teams, and then one guy sitting behind the weapons officer on the aircraft. And we were making sure that everything that we were doing was safe, making sure that there was not going to be any fratricide between our gunship and our guys on the ground. So, which worked out really well. So I happened to be on the one of the AC-130 gunships the same day that um, um, that Jason Cunningham, Kerry Miller up on Roberts Ridge, Neil Roberts thing, and yeah, John Chapman and all that
Right.
stuff. So
Which is the
we
only
did our
Medal of
mission.
Honor ever caught on video, because there was, I
It
guess,
is
sunlight watching.
absolutely. Yep. So we had just finished our mission and we were flying back, and that's when that all started to transpire. So as soon as I got on the ground at our base, I went straight into the operations center and started to get involved in what was happening to our guys out on the ground, because Kerry Miller, the PJ that was up on a hill, was part of my unit. So I was very vested in it. And Jason Cunningham, just a couple days before that, I had been sitting there at Bagram Tower, talking to him about, how he grew up, shooting groundhogs and all that sort of stuff. He was telling me all these cool stories, and then, sadly we lost him.
Yeah.
But good thing is I got to know him. So, but yeah, so did that for a couple weeks, and then I ended up getting redeployed home.
Right. So you're over there for what, a couple of years, or
how long was I deployed over there?
Yeah, the very early part of the war. So you got there very.
So I believe I got there mid-November, and I was back home by end of March.
Wow, that's fairly fast.
Oh. Yeah, it wasn't too bad. I was back home, and then I got redeployed to an operations center, so where I got to do some pretty coul stuff.
Right. Which would make for a great story that we're not going to share. So,
right.
Fair enough. That's all. And was that the you were in for a number of years after that? Was it continuous redeployments back and forth? Was it a lot more states work, or just a repetitive cycle over and over again? Repetitive cycle makes it boring, but I mean that's the kind of cycle back and forth, is rest up, retrain, and get back out.
Yeah, that's exactly it. So got back. I ended up doing a quick deployment, and then I came back home, and I ended up being chosen as the team sergeant, so as the combat control flight chief. And now my role had changed from being just an operator to being in charge of 18 to 24 guys, and making sure they're trained, equipped, and prepared to go to war, peacetime missions, all that. So my focus was, making sure the training was correct and specific for what they're going to be doing overseas. So we started to do a lot of more direct action type training, a lot more JTAC training, Joint Terminal Attack Control. So we were out at the Air Force ranges, working with the airplanes, working on our skills to be able to put bombs on target. And then
which can, for listeners, that can be really crucial, because we're talking about occasionally very close air support, where planes 30,000 feet in the air and the enemy's 100 yards away. That's not a lot of margin for error when you're dropping something from that height. In fact, that's no margin for error. Is that
there's no margin for error
about? Is getting that exactly right.
Yeah. So we spent a lot of time on that. We spent a lot of time on upgrading guys, brand new guys. We're just getting the qualification and trying to get them up to speed. And then we ended up going to Iraq.
Oh.
So our unit got deployed to the northern part of Iraq. And we covered down on all the JTAC missions on the north side. So our unit got a pretty big piece of Iraq, which was surprising to us. But a lot of JTACs were spread out across the two different operation areas. So Afghanistan plus Iraq. So luckily we got to go into war right away, and we did very well. So.
And from your point of view, for a civilian who doesn't quite know, when you say we did pretty well, what are the metrics by which you judged the performance, the efficacy of what you and your teams have done?
Yeah, so great question. so, so what that means is, we got in, we forward deployed, and then we deployed into Iraq, into our locations. We spread out along the green line. So in the north, there was a green line where the PUK and the PDK were lined up against the Republican Guard. So that was the Kurdish forces against the Iraqis.
Right. Well, the Turks are busy calling the Kurds terrorists and separatists while they're trying to fight a war on their own doorstep. Yeah, that was, I'm sure, very helpful for you all. But,
right.
Sorry.
Well, we joined up with the Kurds, and we were, working with them, and it actually worked out very well. They were able to take us directly to where the targets were that we needed to move
That's
through,
helpful.
to move down to Baghdad. So the first mission I got, well, I would say the first mission I got was very surprising to me because we hadn't trained with B-52s hardly at all, for the fact that most close air support is done with with a fighter jet, F-15, F-16s, A-10s. But all of a sudden, because we were in the north and we were so far away from the coast, none of those smaller jets could get to where we were at. So they were bringing in B-52s. So we ended up working almost primarily B-52s the whole entire time, learning new tactics, techniques, and procedures kind of on the fly.
Because they're also deploying different types of munitions, and the fighter jets would be more guided versus the B-52, which were less.
Right, the B-52s, they had bombs that were retrofitted with GPS, so we were able to give them accurate coordinates, and they were able to get those bombs on target very, very successfully. And yeah,
big thing.
It was very interesting. One, working with the Kurds, and then two, how quickly the Iraqi forces basically packed up. As soon as we moved and engaged them, the next day they were packed up and they were moving.
Right.
And they were heading south.
No, thank you. I don't need this.
Right. I think a lot of them remembered the first Iraq war, and that they didn't want to be around for that to happen again.
No, that did not look like it was a good idea to be on the receiving end of at all. No. Well, I'm curious, shift gears slightly. If for young men listening, and I guess women too, but as far as I gather, it's been mainly men. What's your thought? What sort of guidance would you give to some 18-year-olds? Like, this sounds like the greatest thing ever. I want to go do this. Like, what do you say to folks like that? What pluses, minuses?
What do I say to those guys and gals is know why you want to do it. Just like any business person, I want to open up a business and I want to be successful at it. Know why you want to do it and be very specific and drill down into it. So how you do that is you educate yourself, start reading books, Alone at Dawn, anything about combat control that you can digest and get into your brain. And then you can start figuring out specifically what it is that's driving you towards that goal to become a combat controller. So for me, when I went through, ultimately, I built my commitment to be a combat controller was basically I just wanted to be the tip of the spear. I want to do something fun for my life. I wanted it to be tough, because I knew I was going to be persistent enough to be able to get to that end goal, become a combat controller. So that's what I try to explain to those young people. You have to be really good at setting goals, not just long-term, short-term goals, but you have to make them specific, put some measurement behind them, and just start laying some focus behind that, and then be prepared to have immediate goals. So as if you want to become a combat controller, that initial training is going to be extremely challenging physically. It's going to be extremely challenging mentally. And at times you're going to be hungry. You're going to be tired physically. And you're going to start getting some negative thoughts in there. So you're going to have to come up with some really immediate goals. One way I did that when I was going through training was I was not a great distance runner. And to go through this training, you have to be a distance runner. So ultimately, my immediate goals when I was running is I would look ahead and I look at an electric pole and I'm like, all right, I'm staying with the team to that electric pole. And I get there, it's like, all right, pat on my back, next electric pole, next stop sign.
Right.
And that's how I made it through the first couple of weeks until I finally started getting my legs. But you have to be really good at setting goals and then trying to accomplish them by being specific, setting those measuring goals to get there. And then just like any other business, you have to have a vision, and you have to visualize what that success is going to be on the other end. I think that was one of the main reasons why I was so successful, not just in training to become a combat controller, but also in my career as a operator, as a team chief, as a chief master sergeant, special tactics squadron, is I was able to visualize what success looks like, and I try to point myself that direction. So if I was talking to a kid, I would tell him, hey, visualize what success is, and talk to yourself positively so that you're always looking for the optimistic side of where you're going. And that kind of rules back into, on the team. I always talk to my team. I'm like, hey, I didn't want negativity on the team. If the team started getting negative, we would stop and be like, okay, what's going on here? And then we would talk about it, and then we would get back into it, because obviously negativity is a bad force that you don't want to have around you. Especially
saps more energy than anything.
Right? Especially for small teams as operators, and we're going to go out and we're going to work in, a 4-man team, a 7-man team. Man, it just takes one person to really bring that whole group down and kind of lose its trajectory of where it wants to go. And then just ultimately be prepared.
That makes sense. One thing which maybe you've got a thought on, what I found fascinating, having spent a bunch of time at Lackland and other listening to some of the training courses, and of course hearing the difference between the master sergeant who's busy explaining how we're going to kick everyone's ass, and having the colonel in command step in and say, "Oh, you mean lovingly care and nurture so people can reach their best potential?" Right? Like,
yes,
that's what you meant by kick their ass.
Yeah,
I find it absolutely fascinating having to deal with running teams big and small in the private sector, and the difference of how that works. What I've heard many others say to me, especially kind of in the immediate relation to how poorly the Russians have done within, say, Ukraine recently, is the very strong presence of the American military tradition of the non-commissioned officer class, right? That is the main difference. And going all the way back to Concord Green in 1775, you had a bunch of generals on horses with big, very helpful brass plates to aim at, and then a bunch of privates. And so when the heads cut off the snake, they just wandered around uselessly. I mean, maybe you could give a little comment about how that military structure works and why it makes us such an incredibly effective fighting force.
Yeah, I mean, it does. Especially in the combat control career field, there is a lot of autonomy given to each operator to be able to do his job. So if you're comparing that to Russia and us, I don't think the Russian forces or Russian command gives their enlisted or whatever they call them folks that autonomy at all to be able to make a decision on the fly. Obviously, we're given our rules of engagement, and the rules that we're supposed to stay within. And it's up to the operator to be able to make that decision and still play within that box. And as combat controllers, we're basically, even though when you're going through training, it feels like everything is decided for you and it's very formalized. You're starting to get the idea from the instructors that, hey, there's going to be a bigger world outside of here. So we're making sure you're going to be the right guy for this career path, but understand that soon as we identify you're the right guy, then the aperture is going to open up a little bit for you, and you're going to start to be able to make sound decisions and still be and trusted that you're going to stay within that box, but yet accomplish your mission. So does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It also came up, one of the things I found absolutely fascinating was how much of a lot of combat controllers have kind of said this in different ways, but I know that at the training weekend we went through, the training day, we kind of mirrored the cadets. It was so this is where the individual comes to die and become part of a team. I found the paradox kind of fascinating, right? Because it's a team, but also every individual is really highly trained and highly focused and highly independent in terms of making decisions, right? So I found that incredibly fascinating, right? It's not a team in the sense of I'm just being told what to do. It's a team in that I'm making decisions, but I'm making them consciously with the interests of everyone around me at hand. And I imagine that's a big chunk of the selection process. So you might get perfectly excellent people who are perfectly excellent athletes, who are perfectly excellent in whatever, but if they are unable to work effectively in a team, that kind of alone is enough to wash them out because they're going to be a weak link. Are those sort of criteria conscious when candidates are being evaluated at each stage of the pipeline? Is that how they look at it?
So there's certain attributes that the instructors are looking for. And part of that is, are you a team guy? Do you, are you just outwardly focused on your team? Obviously it's very difficult. If you're in a difficult situation, yeah, you're going to be focused on yourself, but you have to also realize that you're part of that team, and you have to be able to keep an eye on your buddies to make sure that they're getting everything accomplished that they need to accomplish. And if they're not, man, I need to step in. I need to help them out. So I believe that's as the instructors are going through, they're looking for these certain attributes in these students. They're grading them by those attributes. And that's what's getting us very good new operators out there in the battle space.
And it's still a massive attrition rate. Like no one starts the pipeline who is not qualified to potentially complete the pipeline. And my understanding is, despite a lot of money poured in statistics and examination and psychology, it's still kind of hard to predict. It's still like a 12% completion rate. And there's no disparagement on those that don't make it. It's just this incredibly hard thing to do, and that number stayed kind of constant, right?
Yeah.
Intake
it's hard to select. It's hard to find just the right guy. I mean, there's a lot of great people out there, but they're not specifically the right guy for this job. So the instructors do an awesome job, in my opinion, doing this selection process, putting the guys through the rigors, trying to do it safely, because, so ultimately it comes right down to, at the very end, you got this operator, he has to work effectively on this team, this small team, and there has to be a lot of trust in that teammate, being that trust starts out in that guy's pipeline. He starts building trust with all the other operators as he's going through that pipeline until he gets that beret on. And now, okay, you're trusted to be able to put the beret on. Now you get to the team, and now you got to start working again, trying to get to that 5 levels So you're still building that trust for your teammates. It's a very important piece of being a combat controller, for the sake that, yeah, we're a team of combat controllers, but like you said, we deploy out onesies and twosies to all these other special warfare teams, and they are also teams, and they are also bred in that same mold. So we have to be able to integrate into those teams easily, and they have to have the trust in us that we're going to be there to do the job and also be a solid teammate. And that's what I believe is one of the probably one of the keys to combat control success over the last 20-25 years, is for the fact that we've been able to integrate into those teams and be a teammate right off the bat. Because they have that, we've been building that trust, and now it's just ingrained. Oh, we got a combat controller, awesome. We got our ground to air interface guy.
Right. That's awesome. Well, I thank you very much. I know your time is precious. I appreciate you taking the time. Are there any sort of final words? That's a wrong phrase. Any sort of kind of final thoughts or comments that you'd give to folks who are, they can, certainly go read Alone at Dawn. Hopefully there'll be a movie soon. The other information about it is, in general, is there sort of one final message you'd leave people with?
Sure. Yeah, if you decide that you want to become a combat controller, man, it's not rocket science. I mean, there's so much information out there. If you get on the internet and you start doing a search for combat control, learn about it, fill your head full of information, figure out why you want to do this job, and then start preparing yourself to get into the program. And what do I mean by preparing yourself? One, prepare yourself physically. That totally makes sense. Everybody can see all the specifics on what the requirements are to get in physically, but also start working on the mental piece, because that's where we lose a lot of guys, is they're just not mentally prepared. And what that means is, how do you deal with stress? If you're not very good at dealing with stress, we'll start doing some stress scenarios and try to get yourself better at it. Learn a little bit about nutrition, learn about how to manage the stress, the anxiety, all that sort of stuff. There's so much information out there, but ultimately, like I said, get prepared, physically and mentally. So I would guess that most guys, or about 80% of the guys, are washed out or quit because of the mental piece over the physical piece.
Right. Well, and that's, of course, one of our common friends. He laughed. He was somewhat joking, but he said, there's so much water training, right? As I've heard the instructor say repeatedly, time to practice drowning, right? And a lot of it is controlling panic, controlling that lizard brain, that when you feel oxygen leaving, like that panic is what you have to get over. And a lot of guys wash out in the water because it's really, really tough. And
they do. And they let those negative thoughts start to build up in their head. And then all of a sudden they'll have panic, which leads to momentary weakness.
Yeah.
And, it's like, I can't do this. Okay, I quit. And then they're sitting on the bench watching everybody else do the task. And they're like, I shouldn't have quit. Why'd I do that?
Right. And it's too late.
But it's the panic.
One way to think it.
Yep.
Yeah. And yeah, absolutely. We're watching someone go through it. One of the guys who, been in 25 years, and he was saying, I didn't grow up in the ocean. I didn't grow up as a swimmer from the Midwest somewhere. And he said, I got to the pool edge the first time to go in, and I was so terrified, I forgot the phrase I quit. So I went in. And he was being facetious, but it's predominantly practical thought for anyone, whether they're going into the military or not, is that ability to realize that panic will cause you to make really horrible decisions. And even until you actually go through something that causes that sort of adrenaline rush and that sort of panic, you think panic is a one-way street. It just happens, and then you freeze up and like you'll drown. But it's not, right? You can control it. You can control panic. which
Absolutely.
I found amazing, even as I got to understand that later in life. You can control panic, and it's something
Absolutely.
that is not really readily taught in most places. But it was
You can
I
build
felt it was
confidence through conditioning. Ultimately, the more times you do something, the better you're going to get at it, and that includes dealing with panic. I mean, that's why you have police officers and EMS people who are very good at their jobs in very stressful situations, and it's because they're doing it day in and day out.
Yep, and we can all see the results tragically on the street, and at least sometimes with police, where they can't control panic. Right?
Right?
You don't
Yep.
squeeze off 19 rounds out of your Glock if you're controlling your panic.
Right?
You don't. So
No.
um anyway, Tom, thank you so much for taking the time. I mean, and again, thanks for all you and what you guys do and have done for the country. I don't think the people have a sense of what our military does half the time. I really don't think they have a clue. But for all those of you who are listening who are intrigued, remember one of the most common adjectives Tom used was fun. Right? So
I enjoyed my
it's
career.
fun, no, but exactly, but that's it. As a very briefly, old friend of mine was debating what to do. He was Army tank commander and had risen up, and now he's a 1-star general, and he was thinking about what to do, whether to retire. And I remember talking to him, and it's a slightly different mentality than a lot of people who go into the civilian world, right? And he said, look, a lot of us are just in this for the juice. Like, they won't let me drive a tank through buildings in the private sector. I
Right?
get to do that all the time if I want to.
It's not a job if you enjoy it.
It's not a job if you enjoy it. Exactly. So, I'm delighted that you took advantage of all the taxpayer funded fun that you had in combat control. And we will sign off as we usually do for all of my listeners that you can learn a lot more. We'll put some links there on the bottom, and there's a great book to read and all the rest of it. And lastly, please turn off the mainstream media who are lying to you and tune into Messy Times. Thanks so much.
Bitcoin mining, Bitcoin wallet, blockchain, stablecoins, Metanet, the evolution of money. Everybody is talking about Bitcoin today, but what exactly is it? Learn the basics from experts. Learn what Bitcoin is, how it works, and why it matters. Bitcoin 101, your ultimate guide to the fundamentals of blockchain.